Okay, welcome back everyone to another episode of the Retro Dodo podcast. Today, I am joined by a man who has worked on many games that you and I will have played probably far too much over our lifetimes. He's probably the answer for the reason why a lot of my homework didn't get done as a child. So I'll talk to him about why my grades are so poorly later on. But I want to welcome Simon Phipps to the podcast. Simon, how are you today, my friend?
I'm doing great, so pleased to meet you and everybody out there. Hi, it's a beautiful day. Let's just talk games and this kind of crazy sort of career that I've had.
Well, I mean, a crazy career is a great way to describe it, because for someone who's been so into art from a young age and, you know, starting off drawing spaceships to then becoming lead designer on some of the most influential video games of all time. I mean, that's an accolade that everyone wants on their CV, right? That's incredible. So you started drawing as a child, then you kind of developed a love of art.
I was sort of 1970s. I grew up on a diet of Tom and Jerry cartoons. I'd always been fascinated by how things work and stuff, and I always wanted to make animated movies. I wanted to make my own cartoons, and kind of looked into it as I was a kid, and really wanted a 8mm cine camera. I usually remember seeing screen tests with Michael Rodd where kids would like put together their films and get them shown. I was like, I want to do that. And I can remember back in 74, so that would put me at being 8, there was a TV show that ran through the summer called Bob Godfrey's Do-It-Yourself Film Animation Show, in which he had about 6 episodes, and it was like how to do cutout animation, how to do all this kind of stuff. And I was like, I want to do that. So I was kind of priming my brain for it, and I was like, every kind of birthday, can I have a film camera? I was like, no. And then kind of Star Wars came along. I was the perfect age for it. So I was aged 11 in March of 78, where I went into the cinema and saw it and came out and went, oh my God, this is changing. This is going to change my life. It's going to change the way I think about what you do and all this kind of stuff. And I looked up at my dad and went, what do you think, Dad? And he went, it's cowboys and Indians in space. And he was right.
That's not the first time I've heard that. It's not the first time I've heard that. But
yeah.
They're not wrong, but they're not right.
Exactly, yeah. And one of the other things as well, actually, for the Christmas Eve in 77, it would have been, I got the Marvel Collector's Edition of Star Wars. There's the kind of like magazine, and you kind of go through and you go, okay, here's all the sort of photos of the influence and all of the stuff that brought it together. But there was all of these photographs of guys working with storyboards and making models and stuff. So then I was taking apart my Airfix kits and making spaceships and everything. And so that kind of went on. And then 1981, I go around to my friend's house, and he'd got a ZX81 that he and his dad had built from a electronics catalogue. They bought the kit from something like Electronics Weekly or something like that kind of thing. Put it together, and he put the Space Invaders on, which was in 1K. It was black and white. Everything was alphanumeric, and every time the screen updated, it flashed to static before it updated. And I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. So, if I go in, can I change the letter A's that are the Space Invaders to something else? I'm like, yeah, a W or a H. I was like, hang on. I can change art. I can make it move on the screen. So from then on, I was like, right, screw the film camera. I want a computer because I've got control of everything. So I started saving for an Acorn Electron. And then kind of like as my 16th birthday was approaching, Acorn came out with the BBC Micro, which was a little bit more expensive, but it was the thing. And parents said, well, look, we'll put some money towards your paper round money and stuff. Get one of those. So I got a BBC Model A for my 16th birthday. And then I was like, right, okay, I'll draw some pictures on it with the little paint package. And then, of course, the next thing was I'll start programming, which was in BASIC. How do I draw lines on the screen and everything? How do I define characters so they look like little Pac-Men and Space Invaders, and then just started to make my own games, because it's kind of like there's the art on the screen, and the natural thing is I'm playing these games in the arcade, and so I was starting to write little bits of BASIC to make a Lander game and little sort of Pac-Man game and those kind of things. Then as that was going along, it was like one of the big things was multicolour sprites on the BBC Micro, and you couldn't sort of just go set a character, define it and set one. They could only be one color, so I had to kind of get into machine code. And the great thing about BBC Micro was the fact that within the BASIC, you could embed 6502 assembler. So I wrote my own little piece of code to actually go in there and plot bytes onto the screen and gave me multicolored characters, and started writing games like that. Then one day, my mate Stu Gregg, who was a friend all the way through school, was coming round because I was the kid with the computer. We used to sit down, play Chucky Egg and stuff like that, and he'd show him what I'd been doing, and he was like, "That's looking good." And I'd written a little. It was kind of inspired because Jetpack was around on the Spectrum, and I'd gone, "Oh, there's a game with a jetpack in it. I'll make one of those." So I made this little game with a little guy flying from one side of the screen to the other, single screen, multicolored sprites. Space creatures jumping up and down, and the most awful pixel accurate collision detection known to man. And the landscape detection was actually calculated. This is literally me just figuring it out for myself.
Yeah.
And he went, "Well, that's really cool. Why don't you stick it on a tape and send it somewhere? I'm sure someone would publish it." And I was like, "Really?" He was like, "Yeah." So I put it on a tape, send it up to ANF Software and Micropower software up in Leeds, and ANF came back and said, "Oh, we don't want it because it's not 100% machine code, we can't protect it, piracy, etc." It's like, okay. But Micropower came back and said, "Look, here's 10 things we'd like you to do. Reduce the number of levels, add a high score table, those kind of things. If you do those, we'll publish it." I was like, okay. So there I was, kind of 16, 17. I did the stuff, and that got published by Micropower. In the meantime, some of my old games that I'd written to teach myself BASIC, I kind of figured, oh, I'll send some of these into the magazines. And so got into, I think, something like Micro Users and BBC Micro magazines. Excuse me. And one of the things that I discovered was they paid per page. So it was like, hang on a minute. If I give them a big load of copy on how I actually wrote the thing, a story, I'll draw some cartoons, that gives them, because they're desperate to fill their pages, that gives them more stuff, I get more money. So I was like, thank you. So I made the most of those little things. And then say my game came out and was like somewhere in the top 10 on the BBC Micro. I was still at school. So
that's wild. So you're still 17 kind of at this point then. So
yeah, absolutely.
The period of you getting a computer from your parents to then watching you kind of messing around on this thing to then releasing your own game is probably like, what we're talking, like a year?
Yeah, a year, 18 months must have been.
Which is wild. I mean, they must have been like, we should have given him a film camera earlier.
Yeah, it's the UK. It was the 70s. I was a spotty teenager with nothing else better to do. What are you going to do? You know, sort of thing. And I think actually, you know, to all my kind of the cohort of people that came through and everything, we're all the same. It's miserable out there, so I'll stay in and make things. You know. So yes, did that. So then I was kind of in the thick of my A-levels, which I completely messed up because I was far too interested in girls and computers. I didn't do art formally. I did it to O-level. So I came crashing out of my A-levels. Actually, one of the things actually during my A-level time, I was teaching my computer teacher how to use the computers because the makeup of my course wouldn't allow me to do computers as a subject, but I'd be sitting there during pure maths doing some differential equations and stuff and go, "Simon, could you just come here?" Like, okay, then I'll set up the BBC Micro so you can print. This is how you do so-and-so. And then go back to my desk. There's no wonder I just messed up. So I came tumbling out of that and got myself a place at Trent Polytechnic in Nottingham, which was just up the road. It was kind of my backstop doing a HND in computer studies, which I did. It was a sandwich course, so I did a year in learning all about how computers in the mid-80s worked, which was absolutely fascinating. I got my sandwich placement job was actually in the marketing department at IBM in Nottingham. My coding was up to scratch, and my careers tutor went, "We've got a job at IBM," which back then was like working for Meta or
absolutely,
like that kind of thing. It was like, but it'd be in marketing. Like, okay, so I spent a year doing mail shots, organising events for the sales team, taking PCs apart, putting them together, loading up software and doing all that kind of stuff. And then came back, did the rest of my course, and all at the same time. In the years that I was actually not working for IBM, I got a job at First Byte Computers in Derby on my Saturdays on holidays. So I was kind of like in the, doing all working in there, selling all the computers and all the tapes and everything like that kind of thing. And so you had the whole ride of, things like Jet Set Willie arriving on the Spectrum and Ghostbusters 84, the summer of 84, listening to that bloody Ghostbusters theme on a loop for 6 weeks nearly killed me.
It's character building, man. It's character building.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, sort of thing. Or somebody come in with a copy of China Miner on tape and go, it doesn't work. And you're like, right, okay, then this takes 45 minutes to load. Let's see if your copy loads. 45 minutes later, it's loaded. And that was the days before Turbo Loader. So there's that whole kind of thing, whatever. Sorry, you'll have to come back. Or I can give you another copy if you're just slightly off with your tape heads, but there's nothing wrong with this one. But yeah, kind of went through all of that. And whilst I was there's a little gang of us, some of the regulars in the store, and there's one of the guys who was a regular in the store that actually came on board and was employed by First Byte, a guy named Terry Lloyd. He and the sort of like the regular gang of guys, whilst I was at Polytechnic, they'd actually put together a couple of games. They'd actually put Bounder together on the Commodore 64, which an amazing achievement. All credit to the guys. They didn't have an assembler when they wrote it. They literally wrote it in a monitor. So they were working out the code, translating it to numbers and putting the numbers in the memory because they didn't have an assembler. And they managed to get Bounder written. Anyway, those guys had started working for Gremlin. I finished my Polytechnic course and I'm like, what do I want to do? And I thought, well, I want to go into computers. I'll go into business computing, but try and do something graphical. So I found a job with a small company that's actually local to me in my hometown, Long Eaton. They were doing desktop publishing software. And it was a job programming BCPL for a graphical interface for this huge typesetting thing. So this was at a time before we knew what right-clicking was on a mouse. Ventura Publisher had just come out on the Mac and they wanted this thing. So I start writing this graphics interface. And actually I can remember distinctly having meetings where we were sat around going, so these buttons on the mouse, well, if you held it and click it, or maybe if you press it and then you drag and all this kind of stuff, because that hadn't even been defined.
Wow, so we're talking like really early,
yeah. Oh, yeah, sort of thing. So ended up going through that, and I was like locked in this little tiny cube farm for about 5 months. And partway through, I got a phone call out of the blue from my mate Terry going, Simon, you're still drawing? I was like, oh, yeah. He said, I need a bit of help. By this time, I bought myself an Atari ST, and I was kind of doing it, just fiddling around with graphics, bit of games and stuff like that kind of thing. But I couldn't kind of crack my way into how do I get into the machine to do stuff? Because one thing I'm not very good is technical manuals. If somebody can get me away, and I'll figure it in. But there's that kind of thing. Now we've got the internet where I can just watch a YouTube or find the snippet of code from GitHub, and then I'm in. But
and then you're in, yeah.
Back then, not a chance. And anyway, so Terry got in touch with me. So we're working on Masters of the Universe, the computer game based on the Dolph Lundgren movie that's coming out next summer, and I need some help drawing tiny little Dolph Lundgrens and Skeletors. Would you be interested? I was like, oh yeah, cool. So I put together a disc of a few things that I'd drawn in, I think, Degar Elite on the ST. And went over to Derby to meet up with Terry and his mates at this little tiny office in Saxon House. Because what happened was they'd gone and got a job at Gremlin. I worked for a little while at Gremlin Sheffield. And because they're all from Derby, it made no sense that I'm up in sticks and going all the way up to Sheffield for an hour or whatever every day and back again. So they opened up a little kind of office in Derby. So I turned up and met the crew, met Kevin Norman, who's one of the founders of Gremlin, Greg Holmes, and we got to talking. We hit it off, and they were like, "Do you want a job?" I thought, "Really?" I was like, yeah, because I was thinking it was going to be a freelance thing. It was just going to help Terry out or something like that. So I sort of came home and. So Jane, my wife, she'd been my wife since 1989. We'd just got engaged at that point. And I remember distinctly sitting around my parents' tables going, what do you think? I mean, nobody makes money out of computer games. I mean, I did the thing that I did, but this is like a proper job. And she thought, well, give it a go. You can still go back to serious computing, sort of thing. 6 months from now, if it all falls in, you can just go back and find something else. So you might as well go like, yeah, let's give it a go. Cut to 40 years later, and that's how it started. So I went along, worked as a graphic artist alongside Terry. We worked on Master of the Universe, Escape Crazy, Knight Raider, and stuff like that. And then in the background, I started talking to Andy Green, who was our 68,000 program, going, right, Andy, I want to do some stuff on the Atari. What do I need to do so I can just get my way in? And he kind of like, oh, there's this kind of like 12 lines of code. If you put that in, it basically turns the Atari into this huge bag of memory, and then you just code. And so what I did start doing was writing my own utilities, starting to write a game, and then that's how I got into 16-bit proper machine code with graphics, and that was the rest of the thing.
So it's really nice to hear, because you are 100% self-taught in this. You just kind of, we chatted to Jordan Mechner, the guy who made Prince of Persia, and he was basically saying the same thing about how you made it up as you went along back in the day, because there was no one had any idea what to do. There was no Unreal Engine, there was no teraflops on your PS5. You were just cracking on and just, okay, how do we get this onto there? What can we possibly do? And inventing things as you go. The same with the guys from Argonaut. They were making code as they went day by day that they're still using today, but just think, oh, let's try that. That might work, that might not work. And it's nice to hear your story of basically just almost kind of falling into this and loving it, and how successful it's been from the early days of just
it's been one of those kind of things. I'm always fascinated by how things work, and taking apart radios when you're a kid and then going, I can't put it back together again. I've got kind of a technical mind, but I've also got an artistic mind. I've just got this drive to try and solve problems and figure things out. So it kind of just all fit together. That I want to make little men run around on the screen. And doing it. So whilst my technical side isn't exactly perfect, I've been able to get the job done. And then the other thing is kind of an attitude of kind of gratitude and adaptability throughout, which is, okay, then if somebody comes to me and goes, oh, we're going to try this, I'll at least give it a go, hear them out and try it, and try and adapt and not resist the changes. And one of the things, kind of 4 decades later, one of the thrilling things has been, and it's something that, going back with say my most recent boss Alex at Three Fields, every so often just checking in, just going, this is the coolest job in the world, and oh my goodness, how far we've come. Sort of thing. Because say from a little man made kind of 8 pixel, well, 4 chunky pixels wide, I think, kind of thing. So it'd be double width pixels and about 16 high, to how many million blades of grass do you want in this open world? It's like, what?
But I mean, if somebody comes to you and says, can you help make a little Dolph Lundgren back in the 80s when He-Man is absolutely massive, like, you must have thought this could be a great thing to have on the CV. Like, that must have been, like,
just
good
literally,
things
this
are coming.
this is just interesting to do. I don't really know what I want to do,
but
I really am bored, stupid with this, sitting in this tiny little cube font, which is kind of like, I remember it sort of being because I was finished Polytechnic, and then started fairly early in the summer, and it was boiling hot outside, and I was in this windowless room with so much air conditioning that I had to have a jumper on, because you're trying to keep all the PCs, cold and stuff like that kind of thing. And it was like, and you just like walls and partitions and suspended ceilings. It was like, oh. So when doing the same thing, but what you're doing on screen is actually cool, and one of those kind of ones of my son's followed in my footsteps. He's now an incredible programmer. He's far more talented coder than I ever was. Some of the conversations we've had is like, these kind of like the transactions you're doing with a multiplayer, you're doing the same kind of real-time transactions and verifications that you would do if you were in a financial system, except yours, you've got cars that explode and fun stuff at the end of it, sort of thing. So there is this weird kind of thing where, some of the technical stuff is just as valid either way, but you end up doing the cool thing, and that's the kind of thing where you just check yourself every so often and go, however, because it does become work, there's a lot of situations with anything that you do that you love and you end up doing over and over again. There's lots of hours where you're doing repetitive stuff or redoing stuff or whatever, but just those moments where you just go, yeah, this is really cool though, isn't it? What did we do last time? How cool this is. And the next project's going to be better than this, because this one we're struggling to get out. It's never going to quite meet what our ambitions were, but the next one, and you just do that for 20 odd times.
So how does a person go about making a video game based on Monty Python? That's what I want to know, because that to me, obviously, if Monty Python, comedic genius, the whole thing, you know, like it's been a staple of British television, and I know I've got American friends who have, you know, absolutely love it. How do you sit down and think, I'm going to design a video game based on this madness and make it relate?
Well, so after becoming graphic artist back at Gremlin, teaching myself how to code, Gremlin folded. Core Design was built up out of its ashes, and we started there, and I ended up at the start of Core was a combined designer, coder and artist, and splitting the art tasks with Terry on the first couple of games. We got round to Monty Python, and we were doing games for various different publishers. And one day my boss Jeremy came to me and went, right, Virgin would like us to do a game. I was like, oh, brilliant. So we've either got the choice of Judge Dredd or Monty Python's Flying Circus. I was like,
what a two completely different ends of the scale.
I know where I'm going, because I'd also grown up on a diet of Tharg and 2000 AD, Pat Mills, you know, Carlos Escara and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, Judge Dredd. We can make a really cool Judge Dredd. RoboCop, I think, had maybe come around about that time, so you kind of have that vibe coming back, and I was like, oh, that'd be fantastic. So a few weeks go by, we're working on this, that, and the other. Virgin had come back, they'd like us to do Monty Python. I was like, oh, okay, how do we do this? So the first thing I did was I kind of dabbled with Python when I was about 14, so I knew I had one of those, I think it was the Complete Record Collection, the LP with some of the sketches on it, which opened up to look like a giant box stack of records. It was quite a hilarious kind of thing. So I had dabbled with Python before, knew my parrot sketch, knew my cheese shop, and the argument sketch. There's a few of those. But I was like, right, I need to do a deep dive to understand what's going on. So I managed to get hold of all the VHS tapes of every single one of the series. I got hold of the Gilliam books and spin-off, the Papa Bock and all that kind of stuff. And then basically for a weekend, I just kind of mainline Python. So I came home, put the VHS tapes on, got a notepad, and then just went through, you know, tape 1, episode 1, 1 minute in, it's the argument sketch, it's got these characters in, it's got that, and just catalogued everything. Took note of all of the Gilliam cutout animation characters, which is really weird, because one of my favourite episodes, that Bob Godfrey show I told you about when I was 8, was the one where Gilliam came in and went, this is how we make stuff. So it was kind of we've got continuity here, then that's cool. And so what I was like, well, okay then, from a looks point of view, we'll never make it look like John Cleese and realistic. So if we actually, if I make it look like the Gilliam stuff, it'll be a unifying kind of look. And kind of like what I can do is I can take all the characters that he did establish, and then I can also do caricatures in his style of various different things like the Ministry of Silly Walks and all those characters. So that was kind of going in my head. We'd spoken to Virgin, and they turned around and gone, we'd like a graphical adventure. And it was like, this is the Spectrum we're talking about. This is the Amstrad with tape. I know I've got an Atari and an Amiga, but we've got to get this out in a period of time. So, we're not going to make The Secret of Monkey Island in 4 months with 5 of us across like tiny little machines or whatever. And our strength was kind of platform games. The other one was and stuff. So okay then, but just don't make it anything like one of the previous platform games, Rick Dangerous, which I think in hindsight was, we don't want you just taking Rick Dangerous and swapping out the sprites and selling us something cheap. Yeah. I was like, okay then, let's go somewhere else with this and see what we can do. So what I did was I looked at the characters that all the Pythons had played, and it was the only kind of character that they'd all played was Gumby, the guy with the thing on. It's like, okay then, he represents the Pythons, and in that cartoon style that Gilliam's got, I can rip his head off and stick it on various different bodies. So we can have a level where he's human, a level where he's flying like a bird, so you're fighting against gravity, a level where you're on the head of a fish, so you're fighting against buoyancy, and then we can stick him on a spring with a boot on it, so that can kind of bounce around. So we've got kind of 4 different types of gameplay. We'll do some nice big sprites. We'll make it scroll or page scroll on the 8-bits that couldn't handle a smooth scroller, and that's kind of the way forwards. And so when it first started off, it was kind of controls based. In terms of the backgrounds, I was taking the more surreal kind of styles from Gilliam's thing. So there was a kind of the industrial, mechanical kind of Victorian sort of stuff, with pistons and all that kind of stuff that he'd obviously from cutouts from old Victorian books of engineering he'd used. I created one which was kind of a surrealist landscape, something that had the Monty Python foot and various different body parts and that kind of stuff. So then that meant that I could build platforming levels that would work. So that was kind of the thing, and they were on board with that. A lot of the meetings that we got to, they were kind of pushing for mini games, but mini games are really expensive because they are miniature games, and also on something like the Spectrum, if you're having to load those resources in, so that's going to take time. You're going to have to please rewind the tape or whatever. So it's like we've got to try and do something that can come in one or a handful of loads and keep going. So there was a lot of kind of push and pull. And that's not helped by the fact that whenever we ended up having a meeting, it would descend after about 15 minutes into, you should put in the cheese shop or name your thing, to which somebody would then start reciting part of the Python sketch, and everything went south from there kind of thing. Is it a parrot? Oh, we have a very naughty boy. All of that kind of stuff with the voices and everything.
Which is exactly what you want when you're concentrating, yeah.
Yeah, and you're trying to. So I was kept coming back, and I remember struggling with the controls because kind of like, one of the things was the kind of the gameplay in Rick was very much punchy and track based and surprises and everything like this kind of stuff. And it was like, we're trying to make games that sort of like handle controls. We've got these big sprites, so they're really quite cumbersome and stuff like that kind of thing. And it just wasn't working. And the project just kept on going on and on and on and on. There's one point or other we conceded to putting in an argument sketch mini game. They also suggested having the score going down from 99999 to 0, which made it completely meaningless, but silly. And one of the other things that I'd kind of come up with was the way that in the Python series, you'd be going along, and because they, in reality, they didn't know how to end the sketch, they would just, record scratch and cut to something completely different, or have a running gag which interrupted their sketches, how to identify trees from a very long, long way. Number 34, the larch. And then you're like, okay. And then all of a sudden it just picked up something like that. So I actually built a little animation player that was all kind of text-based that would allow you to do this kind of cutout animation, and then it just planned, but seemingly random points throughout the game, you would get these very random kind of gags that would just interrupt and then take you on to the next bit. So that was sort of, we had all the components. We'd kind of anticipated probably take 4 or 5 months, and it just kept going on because you just couldn't quite find the game in there. It just wasn't flowing. And we got towards the end, and I think our producer changed at Virgin. We kind of got back together, and one of the guys kind of were having the conversation about it. So, well, actually, could you get some of those kind of like trap elements that you've got in Rick Dangerous in there? I was like, yeah. So you want us to go into a bit of this? So what it was a case of like taking what we got, softening the reliance on the control mastery, and then you could have things dropping on you and surprising you and stuff like that kind of stuff. So I kind of came back, and by this point, poor lads that I was working with were absolutely exhausted. We were all exhausted because we were just trying to, what the hell is this thing? And I said, well, I've got a plan. Nobody's going to like it, but I had a word with Greg Holmes, who was a boss at the time. I said, what I'll do is I'm going to take the next 4 weeks. I'm going to go away for a week. On Monday, I will come back with discs with all of the art for all of the versions already, kind of done. All my listings of animation stuff, all the triggers, everything. So I can deliver the guys a level. If they can get that level in, I'll go home for another week and go through and do the same thing. And I did that for a month, and we got to the end of it. The guys were probably ready to strangle me by that time, and every time I talk about this, I apologise and are grateful for the patience that they didn't, because it was just such a tough project. It was the first project I ever run over on, and we'd gone through. But it was just trying to find what the game was and get something coherent out of this chaos. I mean, so it is that sort of thing of, in reality, a Python game present day does become a Monkey Island style graphic adventure. It needs to be some crazy multimedia experience where things go left of field. You can explore all sorts of bits and pieces of video, cutscenes, etc. But yeah, we had a Spectrum, and that was always there's the lowest common denominator. It's got the smallest amount of memory. It's black and white. We've got to make it work for that. And then I've got the leeway up the top end of the Atari. And we want to make it so that then things like sprites and stuff like that kind of thing, I could draw Gumby for the Atari and then take it down to chunky pixels, 3 colours for the Commodore, black and white for the Spectrum with a load of stippling, chunky pixels and for the Amiga in a relatively short space of time, because what we didn't want to do was be making 5 versions with 5 versions of the map, 5 versions of every artwork.
That would have taken years to do all those.
Exactly, sort of thing. So that was the story of Python. But say it's one of those kind of ones. In hindsight, I'm grateful for the experience. However tough it was to go through, I'm still very proud of the visuals and the kind of style of it, kind of thing, and getting to the opportunity to make all those goofy little cutout things, and to actually incorporate hundreds of references to Python. I did keep a list, I forget how many it was, kind of thing, but just kept on referring back to that VHS stuff of like, okay, then Ministry of Silly Walks, the Spanish Inquisition's got to come in as a boss, Spiny Norman, right, let's get all of those things in. So if you're a Python fan, you see all of those things, either your favourite sketch or character or something like that, to get reflected.
Well, that's how you're making a game like that for the fans, aren't you?
Yes,
that's not a game that somebody's going to happen upon and think this looks. I mean, possibly, but I would say 99% you're making that for the people who watch the TV show. So the extra, you put in that extra time and effort to make. To create, I mean, I don't know how anyone creates normality out of the chaos of Monty Python, but to find a game in there and to have those references, it's like Easter egg after Easter egg after Easter egg, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. So and actually, I could really get on my soapbox now about adapting licenses and stuff and being thing, because that's kind of been a thing through my career, and with kind of seeing how modern adaptations of movies and games to some extent, but mostly movies, kind of. Some creative comes in and gets hold of, I don't know, say a brand like Star Wars, which is dear to my heart, and goes, you know what, I'm going to use this for my own personal soapbox. Screw the fans or whatever. It's like, no, because that leads to hate and suffering and anger. And it is that sort of thing of whenever I've had the privilege of working on things like Asterix, Harry Potter, GoldenEye, Bond, and stuff like that, you've been made, the thing that you're adapting, the license, is something that's been made by a special person, whether it's George Lucas, Joe Rowling, or Ian Fleming or whatever. And they're cleverer than you. And the reason it's successful because there's this magic in there that people love and the fans really want it. So your job is to take this kind of Fabergé egg and adapt it and stay true to it. And then if parts of you kind of come in, all well and good, but to turn around and go, no, this is my own platform, I'm going to change this, that, and the other. It's like, no wonder we're in the state we are with Hollywood. And when you see a really great licensed game, sort of thing, something, I don't know, more kind of in more recent years, something like Hogwarts Legacy, which kind of embraces the stuff and goes, you want to do this? It's it take you along with the ride. Yeah, it's what it is. If you want to put your own thing in, make your own thing that's about that. So tell that story. But it's that kind of thing of a lot of licensed sort of products fail because they don't go in there the creators put their ego aside and go, this is brilliant, I want to become the biggest fan of that and I want to deliver that and true. And I've tried to do that. Whether I've been successful, that's for other people to do, but that was kind of the spirit that I always went in, was like, crikey, because one of the next things was they've given me Asterix. I love Asterix.
Yeah.
I really want to make it right.
You've got to get that right, because the fan base for Asterix is
absolutely,
they are on point. I mean, I remember reading all the books and playing the games as a kid. I used to covet those comics like nothing else. You know, we'd take them to the, I don't know, we used to trade them between friends. We'd then and get them back eventually, but we'd share them and read each other's stories that we all had. And again, the writing of that, the world that is created, it's a brilliant one, and you've got to be careful with those assets, I imagine, and make sure you get it right.
Well, say we'd just skipping forward a little bit. Asterix was a thing that we did for Sega at Core, and Core had done an Asterix game with Sega beforehand, and I was kind of at that point I was helping out with design on several projects as well, having a project of my own. And one of the things was Sega would like us to do Asterix. Can you take a look at it? We've already got a couple of guys, Rich Morton and Stefan Walker, who were putting it together. Can you help with the design? And so I was like, wow, because Asterix was a huge part of me being a kid. I had kind of about 4 or 5 books, Asterix and Cleopatra, Asterix the Gaul, Gladiator, and a couple of others. And so what did I do? I went out, I bought all of the Asterix books.
I'm sensing a pattern here for you. I'm sensing a massive pattern.
I'm just going to go through and read and reference. And one of the things was, I was kind of thinking, there's 2 things that come out of Asterix. One, every book has got a map of Europe. So it's got to be a quest across Europe, with kind of like Mario World does, sort of thing, where you're going to various different locations around Europe. So that's one thing. And I need some quest objects. Well, what's the thing that unifies all of Asterix? It's the magic potion. It's the ingredients. So I went through every Asterix book and found out a reference to an ingredient, because it's often used as a MacGuffin in one of the stories, and came up with a list of about 40 or 50 different references of, like, here's a feather. It is, I don't know whether it's a feather, it's a long while, but it is on page 76, panel number 5 of Asterix the Gladiator. Here's an onion. It's in, and so basically came up with a list of these things that were the constituents, and built an adventure designed around going into these levels and finding this stuff. So then we could then submit that to Sega, who then passed it by Les Editions Albert René, who are the publishers in there, and went, look, there you go, it's authentic. So it was an absolute shoo-in. So we then made the game. I learned a little bit about planning on that one. I actually was the first game where I'd actually designed the structure of the adventure and a priority order for which we developed the levels. So I said to Rich and Steph, right, make this level, this level, this level, and this level. And evidently, when we run out of time, we've not built these levels, and I know that the adventure will still match. And that was something that I did a couple of times later on in games like Shadowman, where you kind of go, right, there is a spine that's got to hold together for the whole game. And then when the inevitable comes in and you have to cut half of the things you planned, we've just not built those. And then also I've got somewhere to go as well, because this doesn't happen once. It maybe happens twice or 3 times during a game. It just is. So I'll build in redundancies here, here, and here. So no matter what, if we do have those kind of horrible conversations on a Tuesday lunchtime where everybody goes, right, well, you've only got 6 months, whatever, you can kind of come back after lunch going, I'm a hero, with the piece of paper that you've had in the bottom of your desk for weeks, because you don't want to dare tell anybody that you've built in redundancy, but when it's needed, it's a...
So you're thinking ahead for the worst case scenario in case it happens, and you can go,
absolutely,
look how good I am, get me on your next game. And you've mentioned Shadowman. I kind of want to... It's an interesting one for me, because the N64 growing up for me was it's kind of been a almost family-friendly orientated console. So, you've got your Marios, you've got your Yoshi's Story, you've got your Banjo-Kazooie. What was it then like to work on a game and design a game where you've got Jack the Ripper, you've got Deadside, you've got a man with a skull in his chest? How are you approaching that and creating this more adult, mature game for a console that people are looking at and thinking, oh, well, this is the answer to my friend's Spyro collection that they've got.
Well, I say the way the Shadowman came out was I started working for Iguana Entertainment, who became Acclaim Studios Teesside. Worked with those guys on the College Slam, which was kind of the iteration of the final iteration of the NBA Jam kind of engine and stuff.
Sure, yeah.
Myself and my colleague Guy Miller, who's creative director at Core, came with me to Acclaim. We'd been used to pitching original products, and we got this team of amazing guys that we'd just worked with on a couple of American sports games. And it was this sort of thing of like, they're really, really good. They just need that kind of break, and we know how to pitch original projects. So we started working with them, getting them to become concept artists and put together pitches and stuff. And our bosses, Darren and Jason Falkus, who ran the studio, went over to New York with some of our pitches for various different games. And one of them actually was, because at this time, this was kind of, David Fincher had just released Seven. There was Lance Henriksen in Millennium, the TV show. It was all kind of scratchy, 9 Inch Nails, kind of sort of that kind of Clive Barker horror era.
Yeah.
You know the stuff. And we'd actually pitched an idea of kind of a 3D adventure, which was kind of like a serial killers kind of based sort of thing. And the guys in New York went, oh, wow, you've pitched us a load of stuff, and we like your ambition. We don't want any one of those, but what we've just gone and done is done Turok the Dinosaur Hunter, which came out on the N64. And that's been a success, based on one of the Valiant comics, because Acclaim had bought the Valiant comics line, and Turok was the first one of those that they adapted. So they sent us like 4 comics, and I think it was something like Bloodshot, Trinity Angels, X-Men Man of War, and Shadowman. And one of them, I think, was it Bloodshot, was basically the Terminator. Trinity Angels was this kind of like trio of buxom women in this kind of Russ Meyer kind of spoofy adventure. It'd be a lot of fun to work on, but like that it'd be like, nobody would buy a game based on it. And whether you'd actually get it past any of the publishers at the time, no. And then there was the Shadowman, which had just been relaunched. It was about 5 issues in. It had this dark, stylish artwork by an Australian artist called Ashley Wood. It was in that sort of Mike Mignola kind of sort of really, really black, deep shadows with stuff, written by Garth Ennis from Scotland, and told the story of this guy, Mike Loire, who'd had a voodoo mask planted in his chest, which kind of effectively killed him and allowed him to then pass between our world and the world of the dead. And me and Guy were like, this is incredibly cool.
This is your Judge Dredd moment. It missed when you got Monty Python, but then you got it back. Yeah, so you're like, right, I'm in here. This is fantastic.
This is really cool. And the thing was, in the first 4 or 5 issues, it had kind of set up its world. It hadn't sort of said where it's going, but it was this thing that Mike passes over into the world of the dead side over there for some random reasons, with this skull with the body of a snake and a top hat and an Irish accent called Jaunty, who was the guardian of the gates of Deadside and everything. And we're like, okay, then we could expand on this world, because it's still just in this kind of form. What if the serial killers were getting organised in Deadside and were coming back out? So we kind of put together this storyline, which slowly evolved. Guy was fascinated with the painting of the Tower of Bruegel, and was like, actually, we could, imagine that was the thing that you had going. We'll paint it black and call it the Asylum. And then we'll have these characters coming through into the real world, and then kind of our real world locations. You can visit them during the day as Mike, and then they change and all the zombies come out as you visit them as the Shadowman. So that was kind of the thing. From a structural point of view, we were really into Zelda on the SNES. Loved the way that game structurally opened up. So you have those re-entrant areas. All of your objects, which are your weapons and stuff, became keys as well. So the hook shot would then get you across canyons. The sword is a key. All of that sort of stuff. So it was like, well, hang on a minute. If we create a multi-re-entrant adventure where the weapons are voodoo artifacts, they become keys or whatever, and that's kind of like the soul of it was taking Zelda SNES and this marvelous comic as a springboard, our own imaginations, and bringing them all together and creating a full world and kind of imagery around it. And say blessed with like the artists that we had there. Trev Story, Nick Patrick, Andy Catlin, Andy Wright, who we were working with, who also really kind of like, after having done quite a number of years of sort of like American football conversions, just when we started saying, we need some paintings of serial killers and big kind of like citadels of bone in the world of the dead, they just went, right, I'm in.
Yeah, we're
in fact, one
yeah.
of the great things was this guy, Andy Wright, he's a animator, but he'd sit and doodle all of these amazing kind of structures of flesh, bone and ideas and stuff. So when it came to me doing the design for the levels, I was like, Andy can have a photocopy of all of your drawings, cut them all out and then go, right, this bit goes here, that bit goes there. So all of these kind of things.
Wow.
I was kind of more concerned with how structurally these levels would work. Those guys brought the art to it and everything. So that was kind of how it went. And then in terms of sort of the tone and everything like that, the thing about Shadowman was it had this kind of evolving movement from console to console. I know that we started with the PC. We had an incredibly talented coder called Ed Skio who brought his 3D engine to us and was kind of the baseline for Shadowman, because back then there were no 3D engines, there were no tools, so those all had to be built up from scratch. And if I recall correctly, we were going to do it on the PC and then the Sega Saturn. Then the N64 started to come into the picture. Then the Sega Saturn got dropped and the Dreamcast came in, and then at the last minute Sony PlayStation 1, which is kind of why the PlayStation 1 version is not the best, and we all turned around and went, sorry. It was one of those kind of things that we had to actually ship. They had to meet the quarter, and our lead programmer Les Long was like begging for like, can I just have a week? Can I have just 6 weeks?
Yeah.
And it was like, no, it has to come in the quarter. So unfortunately, the PlayStation version wasn't the one that we wanted it to be. But yeah, so we kind of just followed this sort of thing. We didn't get any kind of, we knew we were kind of cruising this kind of edgy line. So we never went anywhere that was kind of like too gross or whatever.
Just on the cusp. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's one of those kind of things actually for me. I'm not really a horror fan. I really respect, like, you know, Tom Savini, John Carpenter, all that lot. And I've watched the movies, but I'm not kind of like, oh. But for me, it was kind of this intellectual exercise of like, right, how do I scare the pants off everybody? What can I do? You know, I create a corridor and all that lot, and we'll have Tim, who's an incredibly talented sound designer and composer, to go put some really creepy sounds just off there. And the amount of, you know, in subsequent years, I'll have somebody come up to me and go, I was in that room and all that kind of stuff. And it's really spooky. I was like, all right, okay. That was my mate Tim just putting some water in the thing. You know, it is that kind of thing. But you're looking at it in this kind of, how do we do it? And I must admit, actually, it kind of echoed, remind me of there's the set of low budget movies. The name has just slipped my mind recently. Listening to the director of, there's like a trio of movies. The most recent one was set at Christmas. They've kind of created the new Jason and Freddy and stuff like that kind of thing, horror movies.
I can't.
Man, it's on the tip of my brain. Anyway, kind of hearing their sort of take on how they put together their super successful movie just around about Christmas. It kind of reflected the same sort of thing where you go, okay, how can we push it? What's the weirdest thing we can come up with here and stuff? And everybody being up for going on this kind of crazy sort of journey. I can remember the situation where we were kind of talking around in the office, and then the moment when I kind of went, hang on a minute, but Jack the Ripper could be the architect of this place. And it was like, and that story piece fell into place.
You instantly got your, you know, evil historical reference in there that kind of, okay,
exactly.
Bring it back to a bit of realism, a bit of escapism at the same time, which is cool.
Yeah, and then I ended up voicing him because Guy wrote all the script, and I'm kind of doing my best Waskins.
Did you voice him?
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know.
Yeah, I did the voices for Jack.
That's
I've always
incredible.
done lots of little voices as a kid, and it's kind of carried through. There's only a few people that I've met who do voices and stuff, but yeah, Jake the Ripper. So I was like, "Can you just do it?" And I was like, "Yeah, all right."
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so that's me. And then kind of, I think it's Shadowman 2, I ended up doing some of the zombie voices, and you're like really kind of going deep into the stuff. But you're sat alongside real professional film actors going, whoo, and they're like, yeah, fine. So that's been a thing. But
I would have loved if you were sat around your kitchen table with your wife to be at the time and parents and things, and going, I'm gonna have a job in video games. At one point, I'm gonna be the voice of a zombie. I wonder if they'd have still gone, yeah, exactly. Go for this. You can make money doing this.
And then one day, I'm going to put on a lycra suit and wander around the inside of a warehouse in Croydon.
Not for work, just for fun.
With balls on it, yeah, sort of thing. But yeah, and it's just been one of those kind of things of, that's been the delight of this career, having kind of my own kind of drive and interest in what can I do and how I'm going to do stuff. So getting the opportunity to be in the motion capture booth, to get the opportunity to write the script or to voice the characters and things like that kind of thing, on top of all the other bits and pieces it's afforded me. And it's just been that kind of case over the years, just going, okay, I'm receptive to what's going on. I will try it. I don't know whether I'll succeed, but I'll give it the best shot.
Yeah, that's all you can do.
I can do it, and that's kind of how it served me.